The Texas Tech Red Raiders are going to be a college football playoff contender again next season. I called this last year in April or May. Some people called me crazy, yet they dominated the Big 12. They only had one slip-up game. They made it to the college football playoff and quite frankly had a pretty disappointing performance against Oregon, but situationally, really a lot of the blame goes to Behren Morton and the offense. Tons of turnovers there. The defense, in my opinion, played out of their minds that game. Now, speaking of the defense, that's exactly what got the Texas Tech Red Raiders to this spot. Defensive dominance. And if you look at their transfer portal from last year, they are the players that ended up popping off, especially on the front end. Lee Hunter, NFL draft prospect. Romello Height, David Bailey. These guys were superstars for Texas Tech last season, and that is exactly what they went and tried to get in the portal for next year. And I think they had another banger performance in the Big 12 transfer portal competition. The only Big 12 team I believe that outranked them ended up being the Oklahoma State Cowboys, and that's quite frankly because they lost their entire roster. Now, speaking of this Texas Tech team, quickly, briefly, let's look over what they lost going in to this next season. David Bailey, Romello Height, Lee Hunter. Three guys that I've already mentioned on that front seven, specifically the front four. Romello Height and David Bailey, the edge rushers. Lee Hunter was a great run stopper for them last year at defensive tackle. But then, of course, the best player on this Texas Tech team, Jacob Rodriguez, a Heisman candidate for the majority of the season. Skylar Gill-Howard actually had some great reps throughout the entire season. Not a lot of people talk about him on the national conversation, but going back and watching some of these as I'm getting ready for the NFL draft, Gill-Howard really kind of outperformed Lee Hunter in some spots. And then offensively, Behren Morton, the quarterback who's been there for forever, Caleb Douglas, Reggie Virgil, both of these guys, high producers on the offensive side of the football. So we see here, these are the players that absolutely must be replaced in terms of production. Did Texas Tech do that? In my opinion, the answer is absolutely. Now, will they have the exact same season as those stars that we just mentioned? Maybe not, but this portal class, in my opinion, brings in a lot of depth as well as potential superstars. Now, before you get into, I don't see David Bailey on this list, well, guess what? If you're saying that now, you probably were saying the same thing about David Bailey before last season began. I remember having multiple conversations in person with people, different individuals who tried to tell me that Texas Tech was nowhere near the national conversation. And I threw out names like David Bailey and Romello Height, and nobody wanted to listen. I'm here to tell you, Trey White, the edge rusher from San Diego State, is absolutely that guy. Now, last year was a bit of a down season, 7 sacks for him at San Diego State, but I'm looking specifically here at this junior year. 12.5 sacks, a forced fumble, 60 total tackles. He did a lot more than just rush the passer for San Diego State. 123 total tackles, did not play at all his freshman season. This is a very experienced edge rusher, and he's played against some fairly high-level guys. Looking at his game log from last year, I specifically want to highlight this game right here versus Wyoming. My God, was this man all over the field versus Wyoming. Now, later on in the season, he kind of faded off. He only had 1 sack in his last 5 games. But going back to that 2024 season, let me pull that up real quick. 2024, scrolling down. I mean, look at some of these games. Look at this stretch right here. 2.5 sacks versus Cal. 3 versus Central Michigan. 3 versus Hawaii. 2 again versus Wyoming. My God, Wyoming's been in hell when they go up against Trey White. But 12.5 on the season. Trey White is going to be an instant impact guy. I think this is a draft prospect for next season. Next up, we got Austin Romaine. He is going to be Jacob Rodriguez's replacement. Now, over the offseason, I said that Austin Romaine was one of, if not the best, middle linebacker in college football. 2-time now Big 12 second team, I believe. Who did he get replaced by in this past season? Well, it was Jacob Rodriguez. Austin Romaine is going to fill his position. Now, is he going to put up the production numbers that Rodriguez had? Probably not, but these are some really solid numbers here from a guy who's been a 2-year starter now for Kansas State. Over 150 combined tackles in the last 2 seasons. A couple sacks, forced fumbles from last year. This guy packs a serious punch. There were a couple plays where he just absolutely clocked some offensive players. I love his style. He has great size at 6'2", 245. These are the defensive players that are going to have to replace the superstars for Texas Tech, and I think they can do it. Now, this is a name. We're talking ball knowledge here. Group of 5 ball knowledge. Adam Trick is the guy that I want to talk about here. Didn't make the All-MAC team last year. Doesn't matter to me. One of the premier edge rushers of the G5, specifically the MAC. 8.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles last year. This is an instant impact guy. Unbelievable size at 6'4", 242. He can speed rush. He has great arm length. The extension there is going to work wonders in the Big 12. Defensively, I think these are the 3 guys that are going to have to make the difference for this Texas Tech defense that, sure, had an unbelievable year, but also plugged almost all of these guys in from the transfer portal. Jacob Rodriguez was the only one who didn't. I think Austin Romaine is more than capable of filling those shoes. Now, offensively, we talked about how Belron Morton, Virgil, and I believe, oh goodness, I'm blanking on his name. Let's go right back. And Caleb Douglas, Caleb Douglas. We're talking about how these guys are going to have to be replaced. Well, for starters, we're going to get the number 2 quarterback in the transfer portal, Brendan Sorsby, who on paper does not look like the most elite passer, but 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions last year with 2,800 total yards from Cincinnati. That's not a lot in terms of volume passing, but Cincinnati is not a gunslinging offense. Over the last 2 years, he has over 5,600 yards. I believe, if I can do math, that's 45 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Holistically, 60 and 18. So this is a very impressive talent. He has the quote-unquote arm to get the ball into short and intermediate positions. Now, in terms of deep route ability, I want to see some more. I think Texas Tech is going to test him and push him to his limits in terms of that. We see that these, on average, his passes go for 7.5, 8.3 yards. So we see these ticking up here. It's not like he's not capable of throwing the deep ball. You see that he's progressing as a passer here. His completion percentage took a bit of a dip from 64 to 61.6, but that Cincinnati offense wasn't exactly top tier, in my opinion, last season. Saw them go toe-to-toe with Nebraska at the start of the year. But look at these games. You see that he has some explosive ones early on versus Bowling Green, but the closeout games, to me, are the ones that matter. Right here versus BYU, 300 yards on 66% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, 8 carries for 38 yards. That's huge. Now, of course, I definitely would not blame him for the TCU game. You see 22 for 33, 282 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 10 carries for 59 yards. Now, this section of ball is exactly what I want to talk about. His dual threat ability. This is a top 3 dual threat quarterback in the transfer portal from this whole class. Over the last 2 seasons, over 1,000 yards rushing and 18 total touchdowns on the ground. Extremely diverse and also explosive player in the run game. Texas Tech is going to absolutely use this to their strengths. You saw the Red Raiders offense. It's a traditional pistol / gun slinging offense. You don't see a lot of QB runs, but I do think they're going to try to change that a little bit to play into Sorsby's strength. So you're going to see a little bit more RPO action. I think Sorsby kind of slows the game down for Texas Tech. So you won't see those, 63 to 70 point games from the offense. But what you won't also see is that performance versus Oregon. Texas Tech last year was pretty one-dimensional in terms of having an elite passing game, but struggling to run the rock against a few teams. I do think that they're going to use Sorsby and this run game to try to counterbalance that and make them a more centered run-pass balanced team. I would think play percentage-wise, they probably ran close to 60% of pass plays, 40% run plays. I think they're going to try to do like a 55-45, maybe even like a 52-48 split this upcoming season. I'm extremely excited to see what he's got to offer. Now, to pair with him, talked about that wide receiver production being lost. We've got a few burners that are coming in. Malcolm Simmons, who really came alive late in the season for Auburn. You see this game versus Mercer. My God, did he have a day. 5 receptions, 149 yards, and a touchdown. And then that extremely explosive play in the third quarter versus Alabama. 3 catches, 143 yards, and a touchdown. I want to see him, and you kind of see this hinting at it here at Auburn. I want to see him more involved in the jet sweep kind of action where, sure, it's a quote-unquote pass play, but he's got the ball in space, and he can turn it up the field and make some noise. I want to see more of that from Simmons. I don't think he's going to be a traditional wide receiver in terms of route running and whatnot, but I do think he can be a great gadget guy here in what's technically year 3, but will be his redshirt sophomore season. Really happy to see Simmons transfer to Texas Tech. I think the creativity of this offense is through the roof. They're going to find some way to get him onto the field. Next up from Alabama as well, specifically Alabama State, Jalen Jones, who in his sophomore, or I guess redshirt freshman season, exploded onto the scene. 51 catches, all over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. This guy, deep route specialist. Obviously, Alabama State is no G5. It's definitely no Power 4, but I really want to see him dominate the way he did in these HBCU leagues. Alabama State, not exactly the premier football program, but there's a reason that he was recruited in the transfer portal to elevate all the way up to the Power 4 level. And then last but not least, this is probably the most solid performer of the 3, Kenny Johnson from Pitt. Back-to-back 500-yard plus seasons, 46 catches, 48 catches, 9 touchdowns in his career, 8 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. This is a guy who shows you consistency and can provide a little bit of relief for Sorsby in this offense that has, some continuity issues in the skill group. So there's a lot to be said about this Texas Tech team. They have a relatively weak schedule. If I can go to that real quick, hang on, let me type that in as I'm talking. Looking at 2026, they have a relatively weak schedule in the Big 12 specifically. Let's take a look here. Schedule, and as well as their out of conference. They've got Abilene Christian, Oregon State on the road, Houston to start the season at home, Sam Houston at Colorado, Arizona State. This is their bounce back game next season for home at Cincinnati. Brendan Sorsby returns to Cincy. That could be a tough game, but then Arizona, West Virginia at home. At Oklahoma State, Drew Mestemaker, Morris, and the rest of the crew there for the Cowboys, they're going to have to put up quite a few changes in this offense and defense, as a matter of fact. An entire staff change, pretty much an entire roster change. Curious to see what happens there. But then at Baylor, against DJ Lagway, that's going to be a tough game. Home for TCU. I think Texas Tech should absolutely run the table given this schedule. They have enough returning talent. They fill the spots they need in the transfer portal. There are some boomer bust potential guys like Trick, Trey White, and Austin Romaine on the defensive side of the football. This is a team that has, honestly, all of the coaching prowess as well as the prestige and the been there that a lot of Big 12 teams, quite frankly, don't have. We see Baylor has struggled in years recent. There's a lot of pressure going on there. Oklahoma State is in a build-up. The only teams that I can see really contending with Texas Tech right now are BYU and maybe Arizona State. And I have so many more questions about Arizona State's roster. So BYU is the real only rival here against Texas Tech. And as you can see, the Red Raiders don't even play them in the regular season next year. So I think Texas Tech is absolutely a college football playoff contender. Let me know what you think in the comments. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.